The clock on my computer read 3:14 a.m. I rubbed my tired eyes staring at the code on my screen. My deadline for the software update was the next day, and I had to pull an all-nighter to fix the bugs. The world outside my window was dark and silent, the kind of stillness that makes you acutely aware of your own breathing. I lived alone in a small apartment, and at this hour, the isolation felt particularly oppressive. My fingers danced across the keyboard, the rhythm of typing the only sound breaking the eerie quiet. Then suddenly, my screen flickered, just for a second, but long enough for me to notice. I frowned, thinking it might be a glitch in my system. I was about to resume typing when I saw it again. This time, the screen didn't just flicker, it displayed a string of nonsensical characters, symbols I didn't recognize. They flashed rapidly before disappearing, replaced by my usual code. I sat back, unnerved. Maybe it was just fatigue messing with my mind. I decided to take a break and get some coffee. As I stood up, I glanced at the clock on the wall. 3:14 a.m., the same time as my computer. I shrugged it off and walked to the kitchen, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. The coffee machine hummed softly as I waited, my thoughts drifting back to the strange symbols. I'd seen glitches before, but nothing like that. I poured myself a cup of coffee and took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through my body. I looked at the kitchen clock, 3:14 a.m. My heart skipped a beat. I checked my phone, 3:14 a.m. Every clock in my apartment was stuck at 3:14 a.m. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there was a power surge, a system malfunction, but all at the same time. I hurried back to my computer, the coffee forgotten. The screen was dark. I moved the mouse, but nothing happened. I pressed the power button, and it came to life, the startup sequence appearing as usual. I checked the clock, 3:14 a.m. Panic started to creep in. I opened the browser to search for any explanation, but the internet was down. I decided to reboot the router, hoping it would solve at least one of my problems. As I bent down to unplug it, I felt a sudden chill, as if someone had opened the window. I stood up and checked the windows, all closed. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. I needed to talk to someone to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. I grabbed my phone and dialed my friend Mark. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried another friend and then another, same result, no signal. I sat down, my heart pounding. Something was very wrong. I decided to check outside. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. It was deserted and eerily silent. I walked to the stairwell and descended to the ground floor. The lobby was empty. I walked to the front doors and stepped outside. The street was deserted. No cars, no people. The streetlights cast long shadows, but there was no movement. I felt like I was the only person left in the world. I walked a few steps, looking around, hoping to see someone, anyone, but the silence was overwhelming. Then, I heard it. A faint whispering coming from behind me. I turned round, but there was no one there. The whispering grew louder, more urgent. I strained to understand the words, but they were in a language I didn't recognize. I started to back away, but the whispering followed me. I ran back inside, slamming the door behind me. My heart was racing, my mind in a frenzy. What was happening? Was I dreaming? Hallucinating? I had to find out. I ran back to my apartment and locked the door. The whispering stopped. I stood there trying to calm myself. I needed to think. And what was the last normal thing that happened? I remembered the clock, the symbols on my screen. I decided to check my computer again. It was still on, the code looking back at me. I noticed a new file on my desktop named README. I didn't remember creating it. With trembling hands, I opened the file. It contained a single line of text. I stared at the screen, my mind blank. Who were they? What did they want? I looked around, feeling like I was being watched. The feeling was overwhelming, like 1,000 eyes were on me. I shut the laptop and stood up, pacing the room. Then I heard a knock at the door. I froze. Who could it be at this hour? I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. I opened the door slowly, peeking out. The hallway was empty. I closed the door and locked it again, my hands shaking. I needed to get out of here. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. As I reached for the doorknob, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the apartment into darkness. I stood there frozen, the only sound my own breathing. Then a voice, soft, barely a whisper, coming from everywhere and nowhere.
You can't leave.
I turned around, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. I fumbled for my phone, using its light to guide me. I pointed it around the room, but saw nothing unusual. The voice came again, closer this time.
You belong here.
I backed up against the door, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't move. The air felt thick, oppressive. I felt a presence, something I couldn't see but knew was there. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed by fear. The voice faded, and the lights flickered back on. I was alone, but the feeling of being watched remained. I knew I had to leave, but I was too afraid to move. The clock still read 3:14 a.m. Time was frozen, and I was trapped in this nightmare. I sat down, trying to think of a way out, but every thought led to a dead end. I was caught in a glitch, a loop that I couldn't escape. As the hours or minutes or seconds passed, I felt my sanity slipping away. I was alone, but not alone. Watched, but by whom or what, I couldn't say. All I knew was that I was a prisoner in my own home, a victim of a reality that had twisted into something unrecognizable.
You can't leave. You belong here.
And as the whispering started again, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I was never meant to leave. John Parker was a man of routine. Every morning he woke up at 6 a.m. sharp, he brushed his teeth, made his bed, and brewed a pot of coffee. His life was predictable, uneventful, and precisely how he liked it. He worked at a mid-sized accounting firm in the city, commuting every day on the 7:30 a.m. train. The humdrum of his existence was comforting, like a well-worn blanket, but all that changed one Thursday morning. John was in his usual spot on the train, staring out of the window at the passing scenery. The familiar sights of the cityscape blurred into one continuous motion as the train sped towards the city center. Suddenly, he noticed something odd. The same woman, in the same red coat, walking the same dog, appeared on the street outside the window 3 times in a row. John blinked, shook his head, and looked again. There she was, again walking past in an identical manner. John tried to dismiss it as a coincidence or a trick of the mind. Maybe he was just tired, but as he continued to observe, he noticed more anomalies. A man in a blue suit tripped over a crack in the pavement, then straightened himself and kept walking. Moments later, the same man, the same crack, the same trip. It happened repeatedly, like a broken record. The train arrived at his station, and John disembarked with an unsettling feeling in his gut. As he walked through the bustling streets to his office, he couldn't shake the sense of déjà vu. People seemed to move in predictable, looping patterns. He saw a woman spill her coffee, then seconds later, the same woman spilling her coffee again. It was as if the world was caught in a glitch, replaying certain moments over and over. Determined to understand what was happening, John began to document the anomalies. He carried a small notebook and jotted down every instance of repetition he witnessed. The more he observed, the more frequent and varied the glitches became. It wasn't just people. He saw birds freezing mid-flight, cars stuttering at intersections, and leaves falling from trees in the exact same way multiple times. John confided in his friend and colleague, Sarah, hoping for some rational explanation. Sarah was skeptical at first, attributing John's experiences to stress or an overactive imagination. But when John showed her his notes and pointed out the glitches in real time, she couldn't deny the evidence. They decided to investigate together. As they delved deeper, they discovered that others had noticed the glitches too. There were online forums and discussion groups dedicated to the phenomenon. People from all over the world shared their experiences and theories. Some believed it was a government experiment gone wrong. Others thought it was a sign of an impending apocalypse. A few even suggested that they were living in a simulated reality, and the glitches were cracks in the facade. John and Sarah found themselves drawn to the latter theory. The idea of living in a simulation was unsettling, but it seemed to explain the anomalies they had witnessed. They decided to test the boundaries of their reality, experimenting with their surroundings to see if they could trigger more glitches. Their experiments yielded shocking results. By deliberately altering their routines and interacting with their environment in unexpected ways, they were able to cause more frequent and severe glitches. John threw a rock into a pond and watched in amazement as the ripples froze, then repeated in a loop. Sarah knocked over a stack of books in the office, only to see them restack themselves and fall again. The glitches began to escalate. The world around them started to break down. Streets flickered in and out of existence, buildings warped and shifted, and people froze mid-motion. John and Sarah realized that they had to find a way to stop it before the entire fabric of their reality unraveled. In their quest for answers, they stumbled upon a rupture in the matrix on the outskirts of the city. Using the information they had gathered from the online forums, they surmised that going through the rupture would awaken their consciousness on the other side of reality, the base reality. Perhaps their world was indeed a simulation, an experiment in creating artificial consciousness. The glitches were the result of a malfunction in the system, and the large rupture they discovered was a glitch serious enough that could collapse the world entirely. Faced with the potential of reaching the base reality, John and Sarah were given a choice. They could ignore the rupture, hoping that whatever power is in control brings their world to its previous state of blissful ignorance. Or they could jump through the rupture, potentially freeing themselves and everyone else from the artificial reality, but plunging them into an unknown and possibly dangerous existence. After much deliberation, they chose the latter. They couldn't continue living in a fabricated world, even if it meant facing the unknown. They held hands, gathered their courage, and jumped into the rupture. The world around them began to dissolve, pixels and code unraveling into a void. John and Sarah awoke in a sterile white room. They were disoriented, their minds struggling to adjust to their new reality. People who looked to be doctors explained that they were in a rehabilitation center designed to help simulated beings transition to the real world. As they acclimated to their new existence, John and Sarah found that reality was stranger and more complex than they had ever imagined. But despite the challenges, they were free from the loops, the glitches, and the artificial constraints of their former lives. They had escaped the Matrix, but the journey was just beginning. The real world was vast, mysterious, and full of potential, and for the first time, John and Sarah were truly alive. Months later, as they walked hand in hand through a park in their new world, they noticed something peculiar. A bird froze mid-flight, then continued as if nothing had happened. John and Sarah exchanged a knowing glance. Perhaps they understood there could be multiple layers of the Matrix. There's the base reality, the real world where the first layer of simulation is run. Then inside the world of the first layer of simulation, there's the second layer of simulation being run, then the third, then the fourth, and so on, and who knows where it ends. John and Sarah's quest to reach the base reality has suddenly become potentially a near-endless endeavor. Do they stay and make the most of their current reality? Or do they continue their journey to the base reality? It is up to them now to make the ultimate choice.